Hey everyone, and welcome back. I'm so glad you've joined me. Now, before we get started, I have a special announcement. My newest book, God Has Not Changed His Mind, His Pursuit of Image and Likeness, is going on pre-sale this Tuesday, October 10th. And I am so excited to offer it even at a discounted price of $14.99. So if you would like to order the book or pre-order the book, see the link below. That'll take you to the website where the book is being offered. And when you get to the website, you might even see this book, Fire Upon the Earth, which I wrote in 2020. Now you'll see that this book is being offered for free. It's not a typo. It's not a mistake. I never intended to sell the book. So if you would like it, all you would need to do is pay for shipping. Now, last week we talked about Israel's failure in the wilderness, their failure to take the land. And the reason they failed was because of their worldview. In Egypt, the Bible says in Exodus 6:9 that their spirits were crushed by the cruel slavery they found themselves under, and they saw themselves as not mighty, as a people that had very few hopes, little expectations, and few dreams. And when Moses came and started talking about deliverance, they did allow themselves to hope. And when God delivered them out of Egypt and brought them into the wilderness on their way to Canaan, the problem was they didn't change the way they thought. This God had come down and delivered them, but they never saw themselves any different than who they were in Egypt. In Egypt, they were helpless and hopeless and lived under the cruel slavery of another Egypt, who didn't care whether they lived or died, and they didn't see any difference with this God who was leading them into the wilderness. They didn't understand his ways. They didn't want to know his ways. And when they came to the borders of Canaan and they saw the giants, they weren't going to risk their lives. They knew they were going to die eventually, either under the whips of Egypt or by the hand of this God and Moses, who was leading them to who knows what. And when they saw the giants, they decided they weren't going to follow him anymore. So they changed their mind and they wanted to go back to Egypt. And that's what a worldview can do. It can trap you into past thinking. It can trap you and make you think that nothing in your life changes. Even when Christ comes and everything changes, you're still the person you always have been. If you were helpless, you're still helpless. If you had no hope, you were still without hope. If you were trapped, you're still trapped. God's coming didn't change their mind about themselves, and they were disqualified. So today we're going to talk about another tragic figure in the Bible, and that is King Saul. Now, I'm not going to talk all about Saul's life. I'm only going to use 4 events, because if I discussed all of his life, we would be here till Thanksgiving talking about Saul. So we're just going to talk about those 4 events. Now, in honesty, Saul's story doesn't start when Samuel anoints him king. His story actually starts in Judges 19 through 21. And if you don't understand the background to Saul's story or to who Saul is, then you're going to have a hard time understanding why he does the things he does. You just can't pick him up when Samuel crowns him king. You have to understand the backstory of the tribe of Benjamin. Judges 19 through 21. I'm not going to read it in the Bible. I will just tell you the story. There was a Levite who lived in the tribe of Ephraim, and he had a concubine. And one day the concubine just up and ran away back to her father's house in Bethlehem. So the concubine goes after her to bring her home. And while he's in Bethlehem, the father, who was in no hurry to get rid of his daughter, decides to entertain and stall the Levite. So for 4 days, he sets a wonderful, scrumptious table full of good food and good wine and good conversation. So he's able to stall the Levite's leaving. Finally, on the 5th day, he was doing the same thing. They all sat down to a banquet. Conversation was flowing, and in mid-afternoon, the Levite says, you know what, I'm going home. I've had enough. I'm not going to stay any longer. So he packs up his small band of travelers. He gets the concubine, and he sets off toward Ephraim. Now, it was getting late in the evening when they arrived at Jerusalem. And at this time, Jerusalem is a stronghold of the Jebusites. It doesn't belong to the tribe of Judah. It doesn't belong to Israel proper. So the servants were saying, listen, it's getting pretty late. Why don't we go into the city? There's going to be places for us to stay and places for us to get something to eat, and we can stable the animals. But the Levite doesn't want to stay in the foreign city. He said, we're going to press on to Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin's territory, which is about 3 miles away. And when he arrives in Gibeah, the city of Gibeah, it is late. And he goes into the town square. Now, the reason he's in the town square is because that is the custom of the day. You go and you wait in the town square till someone comes and offers you hospitality, a place for you to stay, a place for you to eat, and a place for you to stable the animals. And for the longest time, no one came near him until finally a nervous old man came up to him and said, you can't stay here. Follow me. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Now, if that sounds vaguely familiar, like the story of the angels in Sodom and Gomorrah, or in Sodom during Lot's time, you're not far off. So the old man he's a hospitable host. He gives a fine table. He sets a fine table. There's wine to drink, good conversation, and all of that is interrupted by a loud pounding on the door. And the old man goes to the door, and his house is surrounded by what the Bible calls worthless fellows. And what they want is for the old man to send the Levite out to them so they can have sex with him. And the old man is horrified. This is a Levite. You cannot be doing this. So you know what he does? He forces his virgin daughter and the concubine out the door, and he tells those worthless fellows to do to them whatever they think is right. Well, now, this is a masterpiece of understatement, what I'm going to say. That's a terrible thing to do. And terrible things happened to those young ladies. And the concubine, as the sun was rising, crawled toward the door of the house, and she died with her hands on the threshold. Now the Levite opens the door, sees her laying there, tells her to get up, they've got to go. Now, up until this point, the Levite's a pretty nondescript character in the story. But at this moment, I don't like him very much. He has no compassion. He has no understanding. He didn't even try to save the concubine from the worthless fellows. And he tells her to get up. No sympathy, no understanding, no compassion. Wow. No wonder she ran away. Well, then he realizes she's dead, so he puts her over the donkeys. They go home. He cuts up her body into 12 parts, or 11 parts, and he sends them to all the tribes in the land, and he tells them to come and meet him at Mizpah. He wants justice for his concubine. So the tribe gathers at Mizpah. Every city, every town, no one was to be exempt, and they made a covenant that they were going to make Gibeah or Benjamin pay for what had happened to the concubine. Now, before they did that, though, they wanted to settle it peacefully. So Israel's elders sent word to Benjamin's elders and say, give us the men who did this and we won't attack you. And Benjamin's elders said, no, we're not going to turn them over to you. So they went to battle. Now, I will say this about Benjamin. He's a scrappy little fighter. And for 2 days, he won battles and inflicted terrible casualties upon the armies of Israel. And after the second day defeat, the people retreated to Bethel and they asked the Lord, are we supposed to be attacking them? Are we supposed to be going up to them? Do you want us to stop? And the Lord said, don't stop. Tomorrow I will give you a victory. And the Lord was true to his word, and he gave them a victory. But the soldiers, Israel's soldiers, rampaged all through Benjamin and killed everything that had breath in that territory. Only 600 men from Benjamin escaped to the rock of Rimmon, a natural fortress that Israel really couldn't attack. Now, after the battle, Israel began to have second thoughts to some of the things that they had agreed to in the covenant. And one of those things was that they were not to give their daughters to any man from the tribe of Benjamin. And what they really discovered was they had marked Benjamin for extinction. If Benjamin couldn't marry, there was no way Benjamin could go on. And then they began to weep for one of their brothers. So this is what they did. They searched the rolls to see if any city or any town had ignored the call to Mizpah. And they found out a town called Jabesh Gilead didn't sign the covenant. Now, I want you to remember that name, Jabesh Gilead, because it's going to come back later in Saul's life. So some of the soldiers from Israel went to Jabesh Gilead, killed everyone but the virgin women, brought them to the rock of Rimmon so Benjamin would have wives. They were about 200 women short. So they told the men of Benjamin that if they would go to Shiloh and catch the virgins as they came out to dance and to sing in the fields, they had their permission to kidnap them, take them back to Benjamin, and have them to wife. All of this occurred only 82 years before Saul was born. Now, when the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel opens, Samuel is the last judge. And he is old and advanced in ages, and he is making plans for his judgeship to continue through his sons. But here's the problem. Samuel's sons are corrupt. Anyone with money can buy an innocent or guilty verdict, and Israel doesn't want to be ruled by Samuel's corrupt sons. That is why they asked for a king. They didn't ask for it out of the blue. They didn't look around to the other tribes and say, we want one of those too. They were reacting to Samuel's plans to put his corrupt sons in leadership over them. The only other leadership that they knew was what they saw in the nations. They wanted a king who they thought would be upright, who would be moral, and who would reign over them in justice and fairness. So I'm going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 10 through 22. Because when Samuel finds out that Israel is desiring a king, he takes it as a rejection. He says, they're rejecting me. And the Lord said, no, they're rejecting my rulership over them. So this is what I want you to tell them. So 1 Samuel 8, starting in verse 10. Now, if you want to know, I use an English Standard Version, and that's what I will be reading out of. The Lord told Samuel to tell the people what it was going to be truly like to have a king. It wasn't going to be about fairness and justice and morality and benign compassion. He wasn't going to be a benevolent dictator. He was going to be someone who realized that he had power. He was going to be someone who realized he had absolute power. And what is the old saying? Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So let's see what Samuel told them about having a king. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. And he will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give them to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of his flocks, and you shall be his slaves. We're going to stop right there. What Samuel was warning them of is he's going to steal you blind. He's going to take your hard-earned money, tax you into poverty so that he could live the lavish lifestyle that he wants to live. It is a dire warning, but that's not the worst of the warning. Here's what Samuel ended up saying. And in the day that you cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourself, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. So they knew that if they went on with their plans to get a king, that this king would tax them into poverty. And when they began to cry out because they were heavily taxed and heavily burdened, the Lord would not hear their cry. They still chose the king because it beat Samuel's corrupt sons. Whom the Lord chose was Saul, the son of Kish, from the tribe of Benjamin, from the city of Gibeah. Think about what that means. Who the Lord chose. How would he be received? And that's what Saul was thinking when Samuel anointed him. Because the first thing he said is, oh no, I'm from Benjamin. They're not going to receive me. That's what he meant when he said, I'm from Benjamin, the smallest of the tribes. They're not going to receive me. They know my history. I know my history. I can't be king over Israel. They're never going to respect me. They're never going to heed me. I'm starting at a disadvantage. I'm from Benjamin. And when he was going to be presented to the people, that's why he's hiding in the baggage. He's not hiding in the baggage because he's a coward. Saul's not a coward. He's hiding in the baggage because he doesn't want to hear the people's rejection. No one would. Okay, maybe that makes him a little cowardly, but no one wants to be rejected by a whole nation. That's why he's hiding in the baggage. That's why when they had to drag him before them. Now look what happens. When the people see him, they say, well, now he looks like a king. He's very handsome. He's head and shoulders above all the people. He looks so kingly. They're like, maybe this isn't such a bad idea, this king, because this guy is something else. It's a shallow reason to pick a king just because you like the way he looks. But that's what Israel decided. Not everybody decided that, though. There were a few that didn't pay Saul any respect. Saul heard it, and he remembered it. Then Saul returned to Benjamin and waited for something kingly to do. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 11. The Ammonites are besieging Jabesh Gilead. Remember, I told you to remember that name? Jabesh Gilead. And Nahash is demanding that the elders sign a treaty that would turn the city and its good and its treasures over to Nahash, and the people would have their right eye gouged out as a symbol of disgrace. He gave them 7 days to consider it. Now Jabesh Gilead sent runners through the enemy's lines to Saul to ask Saul to come and deliver them. Now Saul is coming back from plowing his fields, and he sees people crying and lamenting and mourning, and he asks what's going on, and he hears the news. So what he does is he slays his oxen and sends pieces of them throughout Israel with a warning that if they did not come to his aid, he would do the same to their oxen. Israel gathers in Bezek. All the army is mustered. Saul goes up against the Ammonites. He goes up to deliver Jabesh Gilead. He wins an exceeding victory. The siege is lifted. The Ammonites are scattered. Listen to what he does on the way home. Fulfilling what Samuel said about kings, he didn't allow 3,000 men to return home. He kept them with him as the genesis of his standing army. The next event we're going to look at in Saul's life happens in 1 Samuel 13, a story we're probably all familiar with. 2 years after the events of Jabesh Gilead, the Philistines invade Israel. Saul musters the troops to meet him at Michmash. And because of maneuvering, he retreats finally to Gilgal. While at Gilgal, Samuel sends him word. He is not to go into battle until Samuel appears to offer a sacrifice to the Lord and entreat him for victory. So now Saul has to wait. He has no choice. The Philistines have mustered opposite Saul's army. But behind their lines, they have sent raiding parties into the countryside. And those raiding parties are doing what raiding parties do. They are stealing, they are looting, they are burning, they are raping, they are pillaging, and the whole countryside is being decimated. And word of that reaches Israel's troops. Israel can't understand why Saul has delayed, but they know that they just can't sit there while their families are in danger. So they leave to protect their family. All Saul sees is that they're leaving. What we have here is a failure to communicate. Saul never tells the army why he's delaying going into battle. And the men never tell Saul why they're leaving. Saul misinterprets what is going on. He thinks the men are leaving because he is from Benjamin and they don't trust him or want him to be their king. He feels they're being disloyal to him, and his delay while he waits for Samuel is only exasperating that disloyalty. And they're thinking that he is not a good king. So what does he do? He takes stock of his situation and he forces himself to offer the sacrifice. And as soon as the flames die out, Samuel appears. And he is not pleased. He is not happy that Saul took that priestly duty upon himself. And he expects and demands an explanation. And Saul gives it to him. And you will find that explanation in 1 Samuel 13:11. And Samuel said, "What have you done?" And Saul said, "When I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering." Let me tell you something. Saul did force himself. Saul has a very insecure worldview because he believes he is less than everyone else because he's from Benjamin. And being anointed and crowned king has not changed his opinion of himself. Sound familiar? Pretty much sounds like the people who came up out of Egypt when they got to Canaan and saw the giants. They never changed their opinion about themselves. Here's what I know about an insecure worldview. It doesn't fear one thing. It fears everything. And Saul, in those 7 days, watching the people scatter from him, not because they didn't think he was a good king, but because someone had to defend the towns and the cities from the Philistine raiding parties, thought this. He was afraid of the Philistines. He was afraid that he was not king enough to inspire the people to stay because he was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was afraid that more men would desert him, and when the Philistines finally attacked, it would be he and his sons and the tribe of Benjamin left to defend the land. He was afraid of the Lord. Yes, he was afraid of the Lord. He was acutely afraid of Samuel's disapproval. He was afraid that no matter what he did, it would be the wrong thing. But this is what his fear and his insecurity forced him to do. He took stock of his situation. He had already waited 7 days. He couldn't wait 8. He wouldn't have any army. Where was Samuel? Why the delay? He would force himself. He would make the sacrifice. He would unite the men. He would and go into battle. Here's what happened when he did that. I'm in 1 Samuel 13:13. And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God with which he commanded you. For then, if you had done this, it had been a test." Saul had failed the test. Why had he failed the test? Because he could not withstand the fear and the insecurity that was working inside him. He was anxious. He was worried. He was afraid. And as someone who has been anxious, worried, and afraid, I know how that can cause you to just react to your situation, to do something to get the fear, the anxiousness, and the worry, to put them at bay, to just get out from underneath it. I know what that's like, and that's what Saul's feeling here. But it was a test, and he didn't realize it. He waited 7 days. He didn't wait 8. Or he didn't wait another hour. Or he didn't wait another half hour. He couldn't. His worldview would not let him. He had to do something. And for that failure, his kingdom would not be allowed to continue. For he did not show himself that to the people that he was under the authority of God and the prophet. Now let's go and look at the next event in Saul's life that I want to point out. And this event is very famous. A lot of sermons have been preached upon it. And you'll find that in 1 Samuel 15. The Lord commanded Samuel to tell Saul that it was time for God to repay the Amalekites for the sins done against Israel when they came up out of the wilderness. And what the Amalekites had done is they had attacked Israel as she was traveling through the wilderness. Saul was not to leave anything alive that belonged to the Amalekites. That meant people, that meant flocks, that meant herds, that meant everything. So after Saul wins this tremendous battle, he greets Samuel, who has come into the camp, with he's just overjoyed. He had done everything the Lord had told him to do, and he had won a great victory, and the Amalekites were destroyed, and parts of territories in Israel had been set free and liberated. And Samuel gave him the stare and said, Did you really do everything the Lord told you to do? Absolutely, Saul said. Samuel, well, if that's true, why do I hear the bleating of sheep and the lowing of cattle? And Saul says, oh, well, I wanted to destroy them, but the people wanted to keep them so that they could offer them to the Lord. Oh, my word. How many times have I done something just like that? That the Lord told me to do something, I go halfway in doing it, don't do the rest that would cost me something, and then try to justify why I didn't do that part. How many times have I done that? How many times in my thinking, because of my insecure and fearful worldview, have I said, well, the Lord really wouldn't expect me to give that away. The Lord really wouldn't expect me to take that stand. The Lord doesn't really want me to do. You can justify anything, and the self will give you the ammunition to do it. Your worldview will back you up in your supposition that you don't have to obey fully. Listen. God's will must be done God's way. Saul did not do that. Not only that, he had kept the king of the Amalekites. He kept Agag alive. And Saul is in this huge, lengthy defense of why he didn't obey the Lord. And in verse 16, Samuel said to Saul, stop. Just stop. I will tell you what the Lord said to me this night. And Saul said, speak. Here we go. Though you are little in your own eyes, are you not the head of the tribes of Israel? Saul's problem. Saul's deficiency. Saul's handicap. The reason Saul has failed before, and he's going to fail time and time again, is he is little in his own eyes. His anointing, his crowning, the fact that the people follow him, the fact that the people do as he says, the fact that he can command things from the people like taxes and their children, has never made an impact on Saul's self and his worldview. As far as he is concerned, he is not worthy to be the king, because he is from Benjamin. And long before he was born, the men of Gibeah transgressed so greatly against the Lord that they had to be wiped out. He's never going to forget that. He doesn't think the people are going to forget it either. His wisdom and his valor has made no impact on what he thinks about himself. The people love him. They are following him. They are doing what he has told them to do. But in his own eyes, he is little. And it didn't matter what the Lord had done for him. It didn't matter that Samuel respected him as king. None of it matters. And it is such a shame. And it is such a tragedy. And it shouldn't have happened. But he couldn't get himself to think any other way about himself than the way he always thought about himself. And that is why your worldview is a villain. Your worldview will keep you trapped in lies that are no longer true because Christ has come. You are not who you were. You are not the sum of your failures. You are not the sum of your mistakes, and you are not the sum of what other people tell you you are. You are who the Lord says you are. Your value and your worth to him is that he created you in his image and in his likeness. His son died for you. His son, he gave his only begotten son. He gave the treasure of heaven for you. That is your value. That is your worth. He has called you his son. He has called you to himself. He has put his life in you. He has put you in Christ and put Christ in you. And he has called you. He has called you to maintain his testimony. And all Saul could see were the events that happened 82 years before he was born. And he allowed that to define him, not the anointing, not the fact that he was crowned king, not the fact that he could send word and Israel would come and meet him at a place. None of that mattered. This is the tragedy of Saul. This is why I just feel so sorry for him. A lot of people don't like him because he persecuted David. I read that and I just feel sorry for him because I know what it's like. I lived that way for so long. Oh, okay, I'm getting all mushy and I'm about to stay mushy because we have one more event to say in Saul's life, and this will break your heart if you see it in the proper context. Let me finish the story before we move on. Samuel said, this is verse, 22. And Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in the obeying of the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For the rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry. Listen to this. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from king. In 1 Samuel 16, David is introduced, and Saul begins to descend into madness, torment, as David begins to rise in the affection of the people. Here's what I want to say about an insecure worldview, and this is what Saul has. When you see him persecuting David, don't make him the villain that a lot of teachers and preachers and books make him to be. Remember his worldview. Remember how he sees himself. And when you see that persecution play out, remember Saul is oscillating between being the victim and ruthlessly holding himself responsible for the way his life turned out. He's to blame. There's only a David because he didn't obey. There's only a David because he couldn't rise above his birth. There's only a David because he couldn't bring himself to stand against the people because he was afraid, always afraid that the people would reject him. He blamed himself for his failures until himself could no longer stand the torment he was inflicting upon it. Remember in the very first video, or the very first podcast, where I say that the worldview is a jailer, and the worldview will convince the self that it is to blame for everything that goes wrong in its life. And it's a torment to a self, that is a torment to the self. And the self can only stand so much torment, and the torment drove him mad. It drove him mad. He became unpredictable in his moods and his actions. He was still the king, but the Spirit of God had abandoned him, and he raged at the unfairness of it all. He was a victim. He was to blame. He was a victim. He was to blame. And in that mindset, he persecuted his rival, the rival he was absolutely responsible for bringing onto the scene. He was responsible. He knew it. And he didn't know what to do with himself. And now we come to the end of it. 1 Samuel 28. Saul is ready for it to end. He cannot stand the torment anymore. He cannot stand the madness. He He just wants it to end. But here's the problem. He doesn't have anybody to tell him what to do, and he doesn't know what to do. Samuel has died. The Spirit of the Lord is no longer with him. He no longer has dreams. No prophets visit him. The Philistines have invaded, and he doesn't know what to do. And I don't know about you, but I have been in times in my life where the fear and the worry and the anxiety and the disaster that seems to be pending is just pressing on me. It's pressing on me like a burden, like a weight. And all I want is someone to tell me what to do so that I can be free of the fear. I can be free of the responsibility. I can just be free of the weight that I am shouldering. It feels like the weight of the world is on my shoulders and I can't bear it. I wasn't created to bear it. So someone just tell me what to do. That's where Saul is. Someone tell him what to do. Now he had banished all the mediums out of the land, but someone told him that there was a medium at Endor. So he went, and what Saul asked the medium to do was to conjure up Samuel's spirit from the afterlife. Why Samuel? Because even though Samuel was harsh with him, strict with him, Samuel always told him the truth. And that's what he wanted to hear. No matter how it would turn out tomorrow when he went into battle, he wanted to know the truth. That's why he asked for Samuel. And when Samuel appears, they have this conversation. I'm not going to read it all. You can read it in 1 Samuel 28, starting in verse 15. Then Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" And Saul answered, "I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and the Lord has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore, I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do." It's a sad commentary on a life that held so much promise. When Samuel anointed him king, the whole world was laid out before Saul. Endless possibilities. He could become a force of good for Israel. He could unite the tribes and give them a national identity. He could protect their borders and protect their lands from the enemies that were always trying to come in and steal what God had given them. And here's how it ends. Because he could not arise above the events that happened 82 years before he was born. He could not arise above his worldview that accused him of being less than everybody else because he was from Benjamin. He could not rise above the fear that kept him trapped in a worldview and a sense of self that he didn't want and shouldn't have had, but he couldn't escape. I just need someone, anyone, to tell me what to do. I'm going to move down to verse 19. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hands of the Philistines. He was going to die. Tomorrow they were going to go into battle, and they were going to lose the battle. He was going to die, and his sons would fall alongside of him. And that's exactly what happened. He became wounded by the storm of arrows that were unleashed by the Philistine archers. And when he realized that he was about to be captured, he asked his armor bearer to kill him. But the armor bearer couldn't. He had too much affection for him. So Saul fell on his own sword. And when the Philistines found his body in the battlefield, they cut off his head. They stripped him of his armor. They sent his armor throughout Philistia to tell the people what a great victory they had. What a tragedy. And it was a tragedy. No matter how many victories he accomplished, no matter how much good he accomplished, and he did accomplish good, he never changed the way he thought about himself. He did the hard work. He took 12 tribes that thought of themselves independently from each other, and he brought them together and gave them a national identity. He made them a country. When David would come to be king, he would inherit all the hard work that Saul did that would give the people a national identity. Never once, not for one moment, did he believe his valor and wisdom had changed the people's opinion about him. They would have followed him anywhere. He was their king. They saw him as king. He never saw himself as that. He was the most powerful man in the kingdom, but he lived in fear that sooner or later he would be revealed as a fraud and the kingdom would be taken from him. Well, the kingdom was taken from him, but he did that himself, and he had to live with the knowledge that he was the one who was responsible for the fact that his family line would not continue. Like I said, Saul is a tragic figure. Well, if you liked what you heard, I ask that you like it. If you like what you heard, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. The more subscribers I get, the more my profile rises in the algorithm YouTube, and perhaps my videos can be presented on other people's feeds, and it can be an encouragement and a help to other Christians. Now, next week, we're going to examine Nehemiah. Now, when you go back to the children of Israel at the border of Canaan, when their worldview was exposed that they were afraid of the giants and they would become the giants' prey, giants never knew that. The giants didn't even know there were a people on their border. But when the remnant returns to Israel after the Babylonian captivity, they expose their worldview to the surrounding nations, and the surrounding nations are taking advantage of their fear and of the way they see themselves to enrich themselves at Israel's expense. And that is why there has to be a Nehemiah. There is always someone God will raise up in the times of spiritual declension to call the people back to himself. Now, before I say goodbye, I want to say, remember that the book is on pre-sale starting Tuesday, and I'm so excited. I think you're really going to like the book. So I will see you next week. Until then, bye.